Hello there, and welcome to the Metagame, the live streaming show where myself and the YouTube chat area not only discuss board games, but sometimes also discussing board games. So we don't only talk about them, sometimes we talk about talking about them. And thus the meta-ness of the metagame, I think you get it. Today, I am still going to be your host, Chaz Marler. And the way that this show works is first I'm going to give a short presentation of a topic. And then afterwards, I'm going to skim the YouTube comment chat area that's been going on during this live stream. And we'll have an informal Q&A session with the chat area, talking about ideas, feedback, and questions about today's topic, plus Q&A of anything else that's on your mind. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the chat to make sure that the audio and video is coming through smoothly. I'm going to close through these 5,000 browser windows. Excellent. Thank you very much. And since it looks like we're good to go, I want to mention that as I start talking about today's topic, which is theme in board games, at any time, feel free to post your comment in the YouTube streaming chat area using the hashtag TMG for the metagame. And what I'll do is when the portion of the show comes where I turn to the YouTube chats, I'm going to use my browser's search tool to highlight the chat statements that have that hashtag in them, which will bring them kind of to the front for me to make them stand out. And those are the ones that I'll be responding directly to during the chat time. But before the chat time is the presentation about the topic. Today's topic is theme. Seems that whenever you're talking about board games, you can't help but, and board game development, you can't help but start with a discussion on theme and mechanisms. And which comes first? It's kind of a chicken and the egg scenario. Today's topic isn't really about that. We're just going to focus on theme. Because I've talked a little bit before about theme in games and how it seems that there's a lot of themes that some people would say are overused. Generic medieval fantasy and zombies, and now pirates and Vikings seem to be the hot trend this year in the last couple of years. So a lot of people complain that, there's these themes that are overused. And I'm wondering if it's a cause or effect. Are these themes overused because they're just so easy to use and they're shorthand for communicating this type of game? We've talked about that in previous episodes. Or are these themes used because that's what the audience is used to and different themes won't sell as well? So that is another aspect of the discussion that we've kind of discussed so far. So if today's discussion goes into that realm, that could be interesting. But I wanted to take a look at that of overused themes and whether or not there's other ideas for themes. So my plan for today's show is I'm going to rattle off some of the ideas for themes in games that I've come up with over time. And from one thing or another, and kind of talk about how those mesh into the current themes, twists they put on them, and then just kind of brainstorming, other themes that could be possible for board games. Who knows? Maybe as a part of our discussion right here, we will come upon some unique, new, amazing theme that's never been used or has been underutilized and will become the next big, amazing, generic fantasy zombie theme that within a couple of years, everyone is completely sick of. We can hope. We can strive. We can shoot for the stars in that way. So the first thing I want to talk about is, let me just talk about some of the themes and problems I've had with those themes. For example, way back when I was young and naive in 1995, I was driving my car through town, and the strangest thing, I wasn't really even thinking about board games or anything in particular, but I was sitting at a stoplight, and it's the weirdest thing. I remember it still like it was just yesterday. sitting at that stoplight from start to finish, that entire little couple minute stop, I had this flash of inspiration and I came up with this entire theme and design for a board game sitting at this one little stoplight. It was the weirdest thing. And tell me if this sounds familiar. Because the idea for the game was a theme of producing movies. And you would bid on scripts, you would bid on actors, and certain scripts would be drama or comedy or such. So certain actors would have backgrounds and specialties in those genres of movies. So you'd bid on the scripts, you had the best potential, then you'd try to bid and lure the actors for your movie and go through props and set design and everything. And the goal of the game was to either make the best matches and make the ultimate blockbuster, or go in the exact opposite direction and fail as miserably as possible and create the next cult classic. And both of those extremes actually could lead to winning the game. Oh, and I was super excited. I thought this was a fantastic theme for a game. This was back in the mid-90s, so I wasn't as familiar with the modern board gaming library catalog of games out there that exists that I am today. So I was super excited. I thought, this is the next big thing. This is great. I'm going to keep this in my mind. And since then, when I started watching the Dice Tower more and reviewing what games are out there and such, I've discovered that what I designed is almost completely identical to not even one, but several other games out there with movie making themes that have already been produced. And I believe, I don't know if it's German or French, there's the most popular one. I know it's been reprinted in America, but the YouTube chat's going to have to help me out on this one. I cannot remember what the name of the primary movie making game that matches this theme is, but I do know it exists and has existed for a while. And actually, when I get the name, I should look up the year it was produced to see if it was already produced by that time or if it came afterwards. Anyway, so that's one problem that you can come up with when making a theme, is going back to theme versus mechanics. Some people argue that, some people ask, which comes first? Do you come up with a mechanism or do you come up with a theme? And which one comes first? And I don't think that there's a specific formula. And I don't think even when you develop a game, it even also always fits that formula. Sometimes they kind of grow and merge and mesh and are developed at the same time. But this was a case where the theme and what I wanted to accomplish with the theme kind of set the precedent for the mechanisms that would be employed in the game, at least in my own mind, my own design mode that I was in. So here the theme dictated the mechanisms that were going to be introduced. And it must be something that happens to real designers, not just guys with a microphone and a video camera that sit at stoplights, but it must happen to real designers as well, because it seems like the games in the movie making genre with that theme always seem to follow similar mechanisms as well. They vary, of course, but it seems to always kind of have getting actors, getting scripts, making the best fits, and that type of thing. So I'm wondering how closely then the theme actually would dictate the mechanisms, and if there is a way for designers to break free of that. So, someone mentioned Dream Factory. Yes, I think it might be Dream Factory might be the game I'm thinking of. I'm going to take a moment before I move on to the next item on the list. I'm going to look this up because I'm internet enabled. Yes, Dream Factory, and that was published in the year 2000. So I should have got on the ball and figured out how to publish a board game back in 1995 when I thought of that. And I'm wondering if that was... Okay, I'm not sure if that was just the English edition that was 2000 or if that's when the original other language version was published. But regardless, doesn't matter. You snooze, you lose. Speaking of snoozing and losing, that brings me to the next kind of game, the next theme that I think is underutilized, but kind of follows this same pattern of that's a great idea, and then finding out that, oh yes, that exists. But this time, the timeline of that happening was very abbreviated. For example, I was playing with one of my local game group of friends, and we finished one game, and as we were getting out and setting up the next game that we were going to play that day, we started talking about just game design, and it was another one of those flash of inspiration things where in the time it took us to set up the next game, we had collectively come up with the gameplay for a game about making a prison break, breaking out of jail, and coming up with a plan with your fellow inmates and how you're going to escape and working together, obtaining the materials that you would need, executing the escape, and then since you are prisoners escaping and you're probably going to be being chased and such, at the end, after you work together, actually making a semi-co-op and double-crossing someone or everyone else, one or more people, double-crossing them to make sure that you are the one that can escape, even if everyone else ends up getting recaptured. So it was one of those things where the group was like, hey, we should make this. And then I think after we had that conversation, the very next week, there was an episode, I believe, of the Secret Cabal board gaming podcast that I was listening to. And I believe they were talking about a game that's called Alcatraz, the Scapegoat, which is set in Alcatraz, so a prison, and you're prisoners trying to escape. And the scapegoat part of it is that you have to end up double-crossing someone who ends up being the scapegoat, and they lose, and everyone else gets to escape. Not only was it a very similar theme, but the name of the game even incorporated the primary ideas of the theme that we came up with. Alcatraz, the prison, and the scapegoat double-crossing someone so they take the fall so you can escape. And again, that was like a 1 week span, and that was just several months ago, within the last year. That was like a several week span. So it seems like coming up with a unique theme for a game isn't as easy as it would seem. You'd think that all you got to do is look at what's popular and think in a different direction. But other people obviously have done that as well. So I'm wondering also if maybe the reason that we see so many similar themes in games repeated is almost out of necessity, because it actually is a lot more difficult to go off and think in a tangent and think in a different direction than you might think it is. And even if you do, you might end up with that syndrome, like movies do sometimes, where you will have a unique idea for a movie, but you'll have 2 or 3 movies with that same theme, like Armageddon and whatever the other asteroid hitting the Earth movie was, Deep Impact. Armageddon and Deep Impact came out real similar, and that happens over and over again. And it makes you wonder if you have that same kind of effect, where even if you do come up with a unique theme, for some reason, everyone comes up with that unique theme kind of at the same time, making innovation a lot more difficult than it may be. Now, there might be nothing to that, but that's just one of the thoughts that comes to mind after being burned by coming up with original themes again and again. That problem brings me to the next approach that you can take when trying to come up with a unique theme to a game, which is actually to take an existing theme and try to put a unique twist onto it. For example, one day I was just cleaning my house or something, and I was mentally trying to find something to occupy my time while I was just doing chores. So I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with an idea for a zombie game that is it's going to be zombie-centric, but it's not going to be a traditional zombie survival horror game. What can you do? Is there anything that you can do with the zombie theme that hasn't been done before yet? Now, fortunately, this idea for this game is a zombie theme, but the premise for the game isn't one that I have yet been burned by discovering someone else has done this yet. But by discussing it publicly here, I'm sure someone will point out a game that already does this exact thing. And if there's one, let me know, because I'd kind of like to play it. Anyway, so taking the existing zombie theme and trying to put a twist on it, what I came up with is a game where you play the part of a scientist, a physicist, a chemist, a physicist, a scientisticist of some sort during a zombie outbreak. Now, your role is to discover a cure for whatever is causing the zombie outbreak. And discovering the cure, the mechanisms of the game is that discovering the cure is going to be like solving some sort of puzzle. There's going to be some sort of, I don't know, logic, spatial, some sort of puzzle in the game that has to be solved. However, just before the game begins, you've been bitten by a zombie. So over the course of the game, you're slowly succumbing to your zombie bite. You're slowly turning into a zombie, getting dumber and dumber, and getting a bigger and bigger craving for brains, which is clouding your ability to think about the cure you're trying to build. And so over the course of the game, you're getting dumber and dumber, making it more and more difficult to complete the puzzle that you need to solve to find the cure. So in a way, you're racing against time, you're racing against yourself to develop this cure. So now, so it takes that theme, but hopefully puts a unique twist on it. And it's also one of those games, though, again, once the premise of the game, the theme is the setting and the premise is what you're trying to accomplish. Once those things were determined, that kind of set the stage for what I think the type of mechanisms while playing the game would have to be. Some sort of race, some sort of puzzle. But whenever you run into puzzle stuff, like, Pandemic Legacy, Time Stories, two current kind of puzzly games that are out there, don't know how much replayability they have. So you run into that problem of when you come to a puzzle thing to figure out how can you make that type of game with, the theme presents the need for those mechanisms. How can you make those mechanisms replayable infinitely? That's really the puzzle within the puzzle to figure out there. But there's an example of taking what some would consider an overused theme and trying to breathe new life into it by putting a different twist on it. And we've seen that happen in other games. So if there are existing themes that you think can be revitalized with a different twist on that theme, let me know that in the comments as well. That'll be one of the things that we talk about. Lastly, before we turn over to the comments, I just wanted to mention just a quick checklist of some of the other themes that I was thinking of when I was developing the ideas for this one. Underused theme that I thought would be interesting could be making it to the moon, using what's available in the 60s and such when that was being developed. Kind of a cross between maybe a cross between Mission Red Planet and Apollo 13, those two games. Anyway, there doesn't seem to be a lot of games. There's a lot of space games and a lot of space exploration, but there isn't a lot of historical type of games with that type of historical mission to them, at least that I can think of. When I was talking to this with my daughter, V-Bug, who is really, really into birds, it's no surprise that she came up with a theme of running an aviary with the different types of birds and habitats and food requirements that you would have to set up in your aviary, and only certain types of birds can be housed together and stuff like that. And she kind of went on and on and on. And it was one of those things where she's only 9, but it's like, that actually, the way that she described it, it's one of the things where a theme like that, running an aviary, could seem very open-ended and generic, but when you start to think about all of the requirements that those things incorporate, you could say, hey, there actually is potential for a game here. But she mentioned that theme because she's really, really into birds right now. And so it brings up the other potential problem with coming up with unique themes, is how universal is this theme? Just because I am really into a theme doesn't necessarily mean that everyone else out there can relate to it. Running an aviary might seem interesting to me because I've now been exposed to all this bird stuff a lot recently. So it's kind of on the top of my mind. But it might be something that actually dissuades someone else who's not into that theme from even picking up and trying the game. And that might be one of the problems that leads to overuse of existing themes that we're used to. That said, there is one underused theme that I know everyone would appreciate. It could be a universal theme. Avatar, The Last Airbender, not the movies, but the animated series. I did a Board Game Breakfast segment about this earlier this year. Searching Board Game Geek, there is one and only one pitiful Airbender card game that existed. We need so many more Avatar Last Airbender board games and card games, and it's a completely amazing world that has its own rules set up. And if there's a theme out there that's underutilized that we need to take advantage of more, it is certainly Avatar The Last Airbender. I'm going to put down my little flag for Avatar and get off my Avatar soapbox because I know all of you preach to the choir, and my phone's ringing, even though I put it on mute, and that is probably a good signal to continue on to the chat. So there's my ideas for the problems I've run into with developing themes and some of the themes I've come up with, what I've tried to play with themes, putting a twist on existing games, and just themes out there that I think are underused and could be used to great effect. So I'm going to move my notes out of the way here, and I'm going to bring the chat on over, do my little search to highlight our awesome time hashtag. Oops, and now I'll do it the right way. Hey, that is so much better when you do it that way. Okay, so let's turn now to the YouTube Chatteroonie and see what's going on. And it looks like we have 21 hashtag comments so far. All right, and we'll start off, as we do with most episodes, with our good friend from the chat, Kabuki Kid. Hello, ma'am. Always good to see you. And Kabuki Kid starts us off by mentioning that most designers seem to say theme is the thing they think of first. And I wouldn't disagree with that. In my own experience, and I'm no designer, I'm just some schlep who talks about board games, but in my own experience with that, I've always kind of seems to have come up with the theme first. I will mention something on that statement is I do know that I believe either on a recent episode of the Dice Tower audio podcast, I believe Tom was talking about he was speaking with a designer at either the Gathering of Friends or UK Expo or somewhere recently. And maybe it's a Cool Mini or Not Expo. But that designer mentioned that he said, if one more person asks me if I design theme or mechanisms first, I'm going to punch him in the face. So I guess it's one of those things where maybe non-designers dwell on that more than actual board game designers do. Maybe for actual board game designers, they just come up with the idea and they don't plop it into, maybe it's a little more abstract to them. And maybe they don't put it into the theme versus mechanisms bucket until after they flesh out their idea a little more. Maybe they don't worry about it. I don't know. But it was an interesting thing to hear during that show. All right. Ethan mentions, I think designers pick theme either because they, one, have a real love and passion for the theme, or two, it'll sell. Let's be honest. I agree. I think I have definitely seen that. I've seen both of those. And again, from an outsider's perspective, someone standing in the game shop, holding the game in your hand, looking at it, trying to figure out why was this game made. I agree. I think I've seen games where the person has a real love and passion for the theme and the material. And I've seen games where this will sell. Let's plop this out. And I would hope that we as consumers are able to sniff that out. And that's not saying that some of the games that are plopped out just because they'll sell, that's not saying they're not bad games, but I think the vast majority of them are lacking. However, games that are designed by someone that has a real passion for the theme, from someone who's done a lot of creative endeavors myself, I know that that passion for the theme and the content can blind the developer to other obvious mistakes because of their passion. There is a documentary floating around the last couple of years called The Next Great American Game, which is a documentary about someone who is trying to pitch a game that they designed. And I believe that the designer, the impression I get is that the designer has such a passion for the game that they have those blinders on, and throughout the documentary, you can see they're not listening to the advice that they're getting, and the result is detrimental to the game design because of that passion. So I think, I agree with what you're saying, and just as a board game aficionado, I think that the best results have to be a marriage between those two things. I would like to think that if you had to err on one or the other, erring on the side of passion is better than erring on the side of, well, this will sell. But the glut of zombie games and generic fantasy games that do sell make me wonder if erring on the side of it will sell is actually the thing that's more leads to success. I look at Kickstarter and I see all these Kickstarters that have minis, and there's a saying that if you want your Kickstarter to fund and make 3 times your goal, have miniature figures in it, have minis in it, and it will sell. And so, in this, is it because of the passion for creating minis, or is it and creating a game that utilizes it, or is it, do some of these games on Kickstarter have these minis just because putting minis into your game will make it sell? So anyway, thank you, Ethan. There's the whole many layers to that potato there. Probably more layers than we thought there would be, but that's a whole discussion in of itself too. But for now, let's move on. Kabuki Kid mentions that there is that new Japanese dirty toilet game. Now that is a theme. Maybe that will be the next big thing. I have not heard about this Japanese dirty toilet game, but for some reason, I'm not surprised. Maybe I should be, but no, I'm not surprised. If you or someone out there knows the name of this Japanese dirty toilet game, plop it in the chat. That was a horrible word to pick. Type it delicately into the chat, and I want to look that one up on BGG if I can. But for now, I'm going to move on to anything else. Sam mentions, how about a one versus many game where it's many villains against the lone hero? Now that is an interesting twist, because Descent and even Marvel Legendary and Guardians Chronicles and other games, you always have a group of heroes going up against one mastermind. But I like that. What about where you have one hero where the odds are completely against you and you have all these villains? You know what we need? We need Gale Force 9, who has done Spartacus and Firefly and Sons of Anarchy. They take movie and TV properties and do really good jobs adapting these. We need Gale Force 9 to develop a game based on Die Hard. John McClane alone in this office building. You have many villains against a lone hero. There you go. That's what we need. Ooh. So Sam, I hope Die Hard is exactly what you had in mind, because now, I'm sorry, that's what it's got to be. That excellent idea there. Oh, Roman helps out by mentioning the possibility of the original name of Dream Factory, which I think you're right is like Traumfabrik. And again, I'm not sure what language it is because I'm an ignorant American. But yeah, I believe Traumfabrik was the original name of what became Dream Factory when it was reprinted in English. Thank you very much, Roman. Let's see here. Now we're back up to Dream Factory. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Dream Factory, Dream Factory. More Dream Factory. Okay. Okay, here's one. Maybe a smart zombie game where you play a zombie hunting for prey. Well, now we're flipping that around again. That's an interesting approach to it. Would you be just smart zombies, or are you the only smart zombie? Are you the only smart zombie in a horde of stupid zombies? So you're actually competing with the zombies, or are you competing against the prey? Just by flipping that around, that zombie trope a little bit, there's like 3 different premises that this could go in. Each one could go in a completely different direction of theme and not theme, but mechanisms and such. So interesting. It's neat how just playing with flipping tropes around like that can lead to completely new approaches to things. So thank you. And you are smart and can use any tactics that work best. Okay, yeah, of course. I would hope that the smart zombie would have all the tactics that they could think of at their disposal. Eddie mentions, continuing with zombies here, a zombie worker placement, raising humans for food, warding off other zombie players from raiding your food source, keeping your humans from escaping. But the catch is, oh, here we go. The catch is all you can do is grunt like a zombie. No talking. I can't help but wonder if you've had this idea for a while. That's very interesting. Of course, I would be curious to see what the art direction would be for this, because this is one of those games that could either be hilarious tongue-in-cheek or really, really done in a dreary, serious format. It seems like one where you have to go to one of those 2 extremes when designing such a game. And that's another thing is, does a theme like this one, does the theme dictate the art direction a game like this would have to take, or does the art direction dictate how well the theme will be received? That's a whole nother thing to think about. A similar game like this would be Cash and Guns, which is a theme where you're actually pointing foam guns at each other while you play. But the artwork in it is very cartoony. I believe it's by the person who does Shay Geek or Dork Tower, or sorry, I'm drawing a blank here, but it's cartoony artwork, and for the 2nd edition. And if the 2nd edition of Cash and Guns, if they had gone in a real dreary film noir type of direction, it would have made the game have a much different feel. But anyway, so that's art direction. So the zombie worker placement game, though, raising humans for food and only being able to grunt to get your message across to the other players, that would be a very interesting one. One I think that would be an excellent game for a convention type of scenario too, because you'll have this table of just these weird grunting people in the middle of everyone else, and I'm sure that would lead to some very, very, very interesting discussions. Oh, that Die Hard game. I'm sorry, I'm still thinking about that Die Hard game and how that needs to be made. Okay, let's continue on. Michael mentions that he rethemed One Night Ultimate Werewolf for my Cub Scouts with cards for the ranks, leaders, etc. I kept most of the same actions for the cards with a few changes. And so ranks, leaders. So all of the characters in One Night Ultimate Werewolf became ranks and leaders and people associated with the Cub Scouts. Am I reading that right? If so, that is a really interesting way of retheming a game to make it spot on applicable to your audience. That is cool. That leads to a whole bunch of questions. I know that I know that making homemade versions of games and derivatives of games sometimes can be frowned on, but it's a whole nother topic for a future episode. But I think that's really cool how taking an existing game like that and retheming it specifically for a certain group, I think that can really help to demonstrate modern board gaming to people and help them see what it's about by making something that is something that that audience has an interest in. That's another reason, excuse me, it's another reason why a variety of themes can be really useful. I'm not saying that we should take each game and just reskin it, because that I think is ridiculous, but a variety of different games and ideas and themes and different play styles and stuff, definitely worth it. So that's really cool, and I hope more people are able to be introduced to board gaming through that technique that you did. I'll see here. Kabuki mentions that, yes, I have also been waiting for a good moon mission game or NASA missions. I want that game, and a good one, I mean. Yeah, it seems to be really difficult. I think, and perhaps someone out there has more experience with this than I do, but I think games that recreate specific historical events sometimes can run into problems where they can't have a lot of variation in the gameplay. It narrows the focus, and the option available while playing narrows it down. Now, Twilight Struggle recreates a general period of time, but and that some would say doesn't suffer from that at all. But I'm talking about something where it's a very specific historical moment. No, I'm not even going to go into that. So anyway, I'm trying to think of more games that recreate historical moments. I mean, I can't think of any off the top of my head. So instead of sitting here, watching me sit here in silence thinking about it like some sort of zombie scientist who's who's been bitten and working against that, I'm going to just put this aside and continue on to the next question. Sam mentions, in movies, there's only 7 major plots, but with a different spin. I'm starting to see the same thing in games, but with mechanisms and theme. So just earlier today, I was reading an article about how modern blockbuster movies, the ones that are supposed to have a lot of money put behind them, the more money that's put behind a movie, the more narrower its storytelling structure is. It's like they have this storytelling structure of the 3 acts and then what happens in each of the 3 acts, and they'll put these twists on them, but it's always this same formula for the storytelling, no matter the theme or whatever. And I agree. I've been thinking about that too, how are we seeing the same thing in board games where we're narrowing down to themes or mechanisms and stifling innovation? When it comes to movies, I say yes. But when it comes to board games, I don't know. I don't know if there's as much of a consumer base to have hit that threshold from the kind of the amount of games that are consumed to have that many have that happen. Anyway, I guess a better way of putting it would be that it seems like worker placement and deck construction and deck building and stuff, it does seem like we are standardizing certain gameplay methods. And I'm hoping that before those standardize to the point where they become stale and we start, oh, heaven forbid, rebooting old games, if that's even possible in the board game industry. But before we start get to that level of staleness, I'm hoping that game designers with the smaller budgets and the better resources for self-publishing that are available, I'm hoping we continue to see innovations come into the board game industry before we reach the Hollywood blockbuster level of potential staleness in storytelling that's there. So, in short, yeah, I agree. So I'm going to refresh my chat search here. Let's find where we left off. Smart Zombies, Cub Scouts. 7 plots. Here we go. All right. David mentions, Hey Chaz. Hi David. Chaz, I would be interested in a component-proponent review/opinion of various card sleeves. I bought a game secondhand that uses sleeves that aren't to my liking. Your wish is granted. Just as an aside, there on the Pair of Dice Paradise YouTube channel, about almost 2 years ago, I did an episode where I compared Dragon Sleeve, Ultra Pro, and Fantasy Flight card sleeves. And I compared and contrasted them, and also penny sleeves. So there is a video out there that is available to see on that very topic. And that video also has a huge amount of messages and comments posted on it. People mentioning other card sleeves they've used. So if you find that video, also check out the comments that have been posted on it, because there's a lot of more comments about other sleeve types that aren't mentioned in the video. And also there's mentions of people's experience with all of those. So poof, done. Leaves us more time to talk about Die Hard board games. Okay, let's move on to C. Prus, who tells us that I like watching videos of people who have rethemed products on their own that retheme games to their favorite IPs. That's always interesting to see too. I believe Mike, the guy who always looks angry, Mike from the Board Game Makeover, who has a Board Game Breakfast segment, he specializes in that. Retheming games, upgrading components, and what he does is just insane and brilliant. And he's actually a super nice guy. We've had a chance to meet in person and talk, and he's not as angry as some people think that he looks on camera. Anyway, the point is that I wonder if, like Mike with Board Game Makeover, I wonder, are there entire other YouTube channels of people who specialize in doing just that? If there's a channel that is just about retheming games, let me know, because I would be interested in checking that out too. All right. Next, we have a comment from Michael, who mentions that in addition to how universal a theme applies, is groups that can be used as... In addition to how universal a theme applies, is groups that can use themes applied to them. There you go. That makes a lot more sense now that I read it correctly. Yeah, I think that this correlates to the Cub Scout thing, actually, a little bit. It's finding the groups where a theme can apply to them and trying to find that combination of a theme that's unique that you're passionate about, but is also universal enough that a large enough group of people can appreciate it to make it worth producing. And I'm of the camp that I think that there's a lot more themes that fit into that criteria than are currently on the market. And so I'm a big advocate of innovating and trying out new themes and finding that next neat thing that becomes the next zombie or medieval fantasy type thing. But yes, I agree with you, Michael, that it is that equilibrium between the two. Benjamin has come on to take the time to mention that I've always wanted a game that biologically accurately simulated playing as a shark in its natural habitat, not just being a scary monster or as a threat to the player. Interesting. If you have always wanted a game that biologically accurately simulates playing a shark, if you can get to a convention like Gen Con or Origins or something like that, I would track down someone politely, and when they have time, but I would track down someone named Pete Shirey, who I believe currently works for Cool Mini or Not. Pete is an awesome guy. He's just fantastic. He's been working in the board game industry for one company or another for a few years. But from my understanding, Pete also loves sharks. So if you can track down Pete at a convention and say, hey, there is a market for a game based on sharks, I'm sure that you will have his ear. In fact, I believe, and I'm not sure if it's produced yet, but I believe that Pete is actually working on or is getting ready to publish or has just recently published a game about sharks. And if anyone out there is going to do it right, it's going to be him. So if you're interested in shark games, look up the one that he is developing or has just recently developed or something. But it'd be really exciting to see how another lover of sharks develops a game. Anyway, so there you go. For all you shark aficionados, hot shark tips today here on the Metagame. Let's continue on with other hot board game theming chat tips from Jeff, who mentions, Chaz, I have kids, so I have problems with them. Oh, wait, there's more. Chaz, I have kids, so I have problems with them always somehow losing pieces to games. Do you have this problem, and how do you solve it? I have more problems, to be honest, with the dogs that we have eating things that aren't food, including game components. I feel like I've been real fortunate where we only have the one daughter, but she is really cognizant of not losing game pieces. At least for our game, for my games. Hers, ones that are hers, they go all over. And we try to get her to clean up her stuff. Hey, I'm going on a tangent too. The point is that I think it's something that's going to be just a part of life. Game pieces are going to get lost no matter what, but when you introduce a child into it, yeah, you're going to be losing pieces. Sometimes manufacturers will make supplemental pieces available that you can either purchase from them or request through the manufacturer's website. So that can help replenish lost pieces. And then lots of times, even when we don't lose pieces, what we end up doing is swapping out upgraded, neater components that are similar components from other games. So we have kind of a central kind of go-to set of pieces for certain games. So if the original piece gets lost, we have the ones that we're using. And if one of those pieces what we like to use get lost, we still have the backup plan of just using the pieces the game came with. So that's the closest thing to a solution that I have. So it's not really what I would consider helpful, but it was still a fantastic answer. So I hope that it does help in some regard. Kabuki also mentions, speaking of themes, I want a good game with an X-Files theme or Kolchak, Monster of the Week type of game. Yeah, I believe there was an X-Files game that was released within the last year or two, and from my understanding, it didn't reach the critical acclaim that everyone was hoping for. So hopefully the recent X-Files game didn't kill that theme, that IP for people. Hopefully, much like some of the monsters, it can be brought back from the dead and resurface like the Smoking Man. Hopefully the next X-Files theme, hopefully there'll be another X-Files themed game. And I'll be okay. My mouth is just getting in the way of the words I'm trying to speak. All right, Michael mentions, we're down to about 10 minutes, and there's a thing about half dozen comments here. So I think we'll see what happens, but I'm going to try and zoom through this little cluster of comments here because they look interesting. So here's the first. Michael mentions, I've used retheming as a tool for explaining games to new players. It helps when I can relate a game to something the players are familiar with. Interesting. Again, this goes with the Cub Scout thing. I'm curious is when you say retheming, do you actually paste up and introduce new components and new things that you've printed out with new art to match the theme? Or do you use components from different games that have the theme you want and smush those into the rules from the game you're trying to teach or something else? Be interesting to see what approach you take with that. Gustavo mentions, if we can't create a new theme, let's mash the most overused themes together. An asymmetric game of Cthulhu and Lovecraft monsters invading a world dealing with a zombie outbreak. I hate to say it, but that almost sounds familiar. Maybe it's because Cthulhu and Lovecraft and zombies are just everywhere. Man, Cthulhu, there's one I didn't even think to talk about today. But yeah, there's an overused theme. But anyway, I thought that there was a game that actually did not smash up, but Black Plague. No, that's just zombies in a medieval setting. Anyway, Gustavo, you might be onto something there because it seems like many publishers are starting to actually do that. So I bet that within the next year or two, we will actually see something more we'll see something with that idea as its central premise introduced on the market. C. Bruce mentions, I think human anatomy is a theme that is underexplored. Example, I had a conversation online with Rado of Rado Runs Through about a possible pickup and delivery game using cells and events where diseases, etc. That is interesting. Every now and then it seems like I hear about a game that takes place inside the human body, but it seems like they always turn out to be educational games developed by well-intentioned educators that put the education before the necessities of game design. So you end up with, unfortunately, lackluster games that I think have kind of tainted that theme. So that if someone does see that theme, at least to me, my first gut reaction to a game with human anatomy theme is that, oh, this game is going to stink because it's going to be edutainment and it's not going to have gameplay be what it's about. And that's a shame. I think that is also an area that has a lot of potential. I mean, just look at Osmosis Jones. There's an entire movie that was made out of that wasn't that bad. Maybe mostly because I had David Hyde Pierce in it, but that's my own personal bias. And that brings us back to movies, which brings us back to Die Hard. Okay, moving on. Ethan mentions that I think that it was Jeff Engelstein who was talking about theme or mechanisms first. Jeff Engelstein has a podcast called Ludology. Jeff Engelstein is not only one of the most brilliant game designers I've ever met, but just one of the most brilliant people. He's he's nice, but frightening in that respect. He's awesome. And so on the discussion of theme versus mechanism, I definitely recommend checking out the Ludology podcast as well, because he goes into great detail about these things from very well-defined scientific approaches and everything. It's really, anything he talks about, it's always really, really interesting. So, here's the next comment in the list. I know it has been done before, but maybe a nice game where you put together a band and put them on tour and all that jazz. Pun intended, I hope. I think we were talking about last time how there doesn't seem to be a lot of music-themed games. Even putting together a band, that's actually not making the music necessarily at center stage. But even putting together a band seems to be a musical premise for a theme that seems to be underused. Michael mentions Love Letter, Flux, and Munchkin retheme all the time, sometimes with different mechanics, but otherwise pretty much a straight retheme. And I think that is a perfect example of what we were talking about before of design philosophies of either passion for the material versus, well, this will sell, so let's barf this out. And I think Love Letter, Flux, and Munchkin, my personal opinion is that I think all of those started out as passion type projects of one degree or another, but over time have kind of let this will sell, let's print this and put this out there. I think they've crossed over to that other side of the fence, which I don't know if you can really blame the people, but it does make it a little bit frustrating for someone who wants to play more games and not always have those things thrown in front of you. Anyway, continue on to the next comment in this little cluster, which is from Brian, who mentions the setting may be enough of a change. Instead of the prison example, change it to a hostage or a prisoner of war setting. I know there was a game called Hostage Negotiator that just, I think, came out last couple of months. That's a really good point. And that's something actually, when I was talking about the prison break example of the game as the example, one thing I thought of, I wanted to mention about it, but I didn't at the time, was that when coming up with a theme like that, we've talked about how the theme needs to be universal enough that people will appreciate it and want to play it. But the themes you may also need to watch out for themes that can be offensive to people. A prison outbreak is one thing. Hostage setting definitely could be something that is very delicate. And then a prisoner of war setting, I think, would even need to be handled even more delicately and tastefully than the other two themes. And with that in mind, I wonder if that's another reason why we see so many of the same themes repeated, because people know, okay, yeah, these are socially acceptable. I'm not going to try rocking the boat by introducing this other theme and having it go down in flames when I can just apply this theme to it and be good to go. That might be another portion that leads into that result. Anyway, I think all of those three themes, though, would be interesting to explore. I think the real trick is how the designer explores them. Satya mentions, I still enjoy all the fantasy and sci-fi themes. As long as the game brings the theme to life, I enjoy it. If it's only pasted on, I quickly lose interest in the game. That's true. For me personally, a theme that I don't get tired of, but is used a lot, is space. Maybe it's because I've never been to space. Well, I've never been bitten by a zombie either. And I've never been in medieval. Okay, never mind. That doesn't count. But space is a theme that I personally haven't got tired of. But you're right. It depends on what's done with the theme. If it's an immersive game, then that makes it work. But if it's just a pasted on theme where it's like, oh, I'm going to have this game and oh yeah, it's in space. And there's not a lot more thought put into it, it definitely can make themes not worth playing. So I guess the level of immersion in the game can be another thing that can breathe new life into an overused theme as well. So good point there, Satya. So move on here. We got like 5 more minutes. I'd like to see the idea of Smash Up done with completely different gameplay. One that I would like. Okay. Christian mentions, I'm late to the party, so I'm not sure if it was mentioned, but there are several cases where the theme is not picked by the designer, but by the publisher after it was pitched with another theme. That's very true. I'll end with this. I know Scott Morris, who runs the Crits Happen YouTube channel and worked with Arcane Wonders and is now the president of Passport Game Studios, who I'm currently working for. He developed the Firefly dice game, but it was this dice game that he developed, and when he developed it, I believe it had a completely different theme, and he pitched it, and it was picked up by a publisher. And a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months went by, and he got a call from the publisher. And they say, hey, I got good news and bad news. He's like, okay. He said, the good news is we're going to publish your game. It's like, oh, that's great. He said, well, the bad news is we're changing the theme. It's like, oh, okay. But we're changing it to Firefly. It's like, that's not bad news. So that's great news. So that, I believe that is so it must happen. And it must happen more frequently than we as game players realize. Where exactly that. The theme will be switched, changed, or decided by the publisher. And so that's something, that's some food to thought. That's something to think about, definitely. I think I have now ran out of words, though. My body has been fighting my ability to speak this entire episode. So thanks for hanging in there. But ending with the story of Scott's Firefly dice game is excellent because we're out of time. I need to wrap up and I need to go back to working for Scott. So this segues right back into the next portion of my day. So until our next time that we get together, thank you for joining me in this episode of The Metagame. And for more board game news, reviews, and commentary, be sure to subscribe to both the Dice Tower and the Pair of Dice Paradise YouTube channels. And to continue these types of conversations, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. Until the next time that I am fortunate enough to be playing the metagame with the YouTube chat audience, take care, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.